Oh no! Even before we've come to grips with democracy, we are now faced with the Titan transnational incident. 23 seconds is upon us, and a lot of people are jumping at the spoilers. I, for one, have identified controlling the message, the new NBN identity, as something worth building around, and so have many other people. For those of you who are not familiar with it, let's do a quick rundown of it. It is a 45-12 identity, so just like all the other identities this cycle, it's going to suffer from a lack of influence. But this lack of influence will impact NBN a lot less than most other factions because you have Jackson Howard in faction. Because the ability synergizes very well with all the cards in faction. So you really don't need to import that much stuff from other factions. Speaking of the ability, here it is. Some important points to note. This triggers whenever the runner trashes an installed co-op card. It must be installed, so this is still weak to central pressure, just like Gagarin. This also only triggers the first time each turn, so a good runner might choose to trash multiple installed items in one turn to make this fire as few times as possible. So whenever the runner trashes a co-op card, there will be an optional trace fall, although I don't see why the co-op wouldn't fire it every single time they can. If the trace succeeds, the runner takes a tag and it cannot be avoided. So if Rachel Beckman wasn't bad enough, it gets a lot worse here. So as I was saying, this ID ability synergizes very well with the entire NBN card pool because NBN has received quite a lot of tag punishment and tag enabling cards in the past cycle as well as this cycle. So it is a lot less reliant on out of faction cards to execute its strategy. This deck that I'm about to play today will feature a crossover between asset spam, NEH, and sync exchange of information. I'm going to combine both strategies and put it in this ID and see how things go. Today's match is against Kate McCaffrey. This is not a very good opening hand. It has ice, which is always good, but not aggressive enough and not enough assets. So, in the early game, I want the components from the NEH asset spam deck, which is Mumbat City Hall, Mumba Temples, Panic Campaigns, and most importantly, Sansan City Grids. Unfortunately, there's not enough influence to run Biotic Neighbors in this deck, so literally the only way to fast advance agendas, besides the Astro Train, is to have a Sansan City Grid on the table. So what I would like to do is to build up my board state with Temples and Sansans, and then begin scoring Astros. Now the good news is my opponent almost certainly cannot contest my remotes because they are untrashable. Otherwise, unless my opponent is willing to take the tag, triggering my ID. So that is the good thing, and this allows your economy and your fast advance tools to be that much better protected. Especially if your opponent is Wizard. They cannot just trash your assets for free each time anymore. They have to take the trace, and that is actually really painful even for a Wizard to deal with. So we are not up against Wizard, we are up against Kate, so that makes our life a lot easier. My opponent Dirty Laundries my hand and hits possibly the best thing to hit, the 15 minutes. With the 15 minutes, I can shuffle it back into my deck, and eventually I can find it, fast advance it, and that will be one of my exchange fodders. Now, the important thing about exchange of information decks is that you need fodder to exchange. So it is quite important to have enough one-pointers in the deck that you can easily score. Now, I sneak out an Astro on the table because my opponent has not been running my remotes at all. I figured that my opponent wouldn't run my remotes this turn because they would like to install the cards from the hand instead of checking all my remotes. And I also figured that my opponent was probably too poor to trash my stuff, but I was wrong. My opponent decided to check this turn and score the Astro. Now that's quite a huge deal. I didn't want to keep the Astro in my hand because I was afraid that my opponent would hit my hand, just like he did with the Dirty Laundry earlier, but in retrospect I really should have kept it in my hand. That was quite a big mistake. If I were able to score the Astro this turn, and I would because my opponent hasn't any Clot or any Clot tutor, I would be running away with the game with a scored Astro. Unfortunately that's not the case, so the next best thing I can do is to overdraw with Jackson. I draw into a bunch of non-agenda cards, which is not really expected, so I'm actually forced to ditch ice at this point. So, it is at usually around this point where I start transitioning from the asset spam phase to the EOI phase. The EOI phase involves tagging the runner and then exchanging all my useless agendas with their scored agendas. Unfortunately, I don't have any agenda scored yet, so I'm stuck in the asset spam phase. I need to continue spamming out assets, maybe protect my Sand, and hopefully draw into my Astro scripts. So you will see that this deck actually runs a lot of defensive agendas. I have 3 quantum predictive models, and that is for the event where my opponent decides to tag float. Ice can't keep them out forever, so quantums are actually quite important. Because of this, I don't have any agenda slots for Project View, so really the only agenda I want to see is Astro Script, which is fine. Most NBN decks are like that. They only want to score Astro Scripts and breaking users. Alright, so my opponent runs my R&D with a SMC, and I force the Cyber Cypher out. So, this is quite important, making sure that R&D is rather taxing. As I mentioned earlier, this is a very big downside of the deck, the fact that it is very weak to central pressure. So you need to have very sturdy eyes on R&D to deter them from running every single turn and R&D locking you to oblivion. So multi-type eyes go on R&D, we have Resistor followed by Archangel. So that should slow my opponent down quite a bit. Now, one very annoying thing about controlling the message, the ID in general, is that it completely dies out to high link runners. My opponent has 1 link, so everything becomes that much cheaper for my opponent to get past. It's a very good option for my opponent to trace through the resistor. This is why having a lot of credits is quite essential, and which is why I'm not skipping on the credit, on the economy aspect of this deck. The full 3-pack campaigns, the 3 sweet weeks are all in this deck, along with the Mumble Temples. I'm also not running too many big eyes, just 1 toll booth really. Maybe I should up it to 2. We'll see about that. Now, the Mumbai City Hall finally comes, but if you have been watching my asset spam NEH videos, you know that it is quite useless once you have 2 temples out. However, it's still pretty good clock bait, so keep that in mind. Now I keep drawing, and I really want to see an Astro script here, but I'm just not getting it. One pretty good thing about this deck is that it doesn't really get flooded, unlike NEH which keeps getting flooded with NEH draws. However, it comes at a price. It means that I cannot draw into those agendas that much sooner. And I really want to score out before my opponent sets up and R&D locks me, because my opponent will be getting 3 R&D accesses 3 card accesses every time he makes a successful run R&D, and that's pretty bad news. So there's still nothing in HQ, and I leave it completely undefended, knowing that my opponent's probably not running Siphon Kate or anything that I need to worry about on HQ. Now I'm going to rest the Sand and make him think that I have an agenda in hand. It's a bluff. I don't actually have an agenda in hand. I'm not sure why I even bothered with the bluff, considering that my opponent did not have any way of getting clawed. I suppose I just wanted to use my Mumble Temple credits on something, which is kind of fair. Unfortunately, I'm now forced to ditch a bunch of cards because I Exchange-a-Roo. My draws have been really slow this game. Aside from the first Astro, I'm not seeing anything of value, and that is another problem with this deck. Maybe a fast track would help smooth things out. So that's something worth thinking about. My opponent continues hammering HQ because that's the only server he has any real access to. It's not gonna do a lot at this point. I mean, sure, I could be harboring the Rook Astro script, but it's not the case here. Instead, all I have are my tag punishment cards. The 2 exchanges and the psychographics are all the tag punishment I'm running, besides the quantum predictors, as I mentioned earlier. Now I finally draw into a very key card that helps make this deck really good. Sensei Actors Union. This card is almost certainly a 3-off in any controlling the message deck, simply because it's such a pain to trash. It is possibly the best defensive ID in conjunction with Sensei Actors Union, on par with IG really. So you notice that I install the Sensei Actors Union on the Sand to bait the Clot, and then I ice up the Sensei Actors Union, which sounds really stupid, right? Why would you put ice on Sensei? That would render it useless. But here what I'm trying to do is to tax my opponent, force a Cyber Cypher on the remote. Presumably he has the means and capabilities to get past my toll booth. I want to force that out to slow my opponent down. So at this point, my opponent still doesn't know that that's an agenda in the remote. All he knows is that I have a pretty bulky piece of ice there. It's probably the toll booth he saw, and he needs to get past it. So he uses a stim hack, which is pretty correct. And he's gonna reach the base of the server and be pretty pissed off that all that money went to waste. I don't mind that. I really don't mind forcing the stim hack out. That's a stim hack that could have been used on R&D for much worse effects, really. So this is the thing you want to do with this deck. Force them to run your remotes, divert their attention away from centrals, because that's how you lose with controlling the message. You lose on centrals. So my opponent sees the Sensi and cannot really trash it with no clicks remaining and fewer credits than me. They cannot afford to take the tag from my ID. So, and anyway, there's no point trashing the Sensi Actors Union. I res it, but it's not going to do anything because there's ice on the server. So all that's fine and dandy. I continue icing R&D. I finally draw into my first of 3 Data Ravens. Data Ravens absolutely essential in this deck. Any deck with Quantum Predictive Model needs to see the Raven because it's a surefire way of making the runner do the dirty work for you, getting those Quantum Predictives in your score area. So that's what I want to achieve. Unfortunately, this deck doesn't actually pack any active tagging mechanisms, which I really should, looking back at this game. A C-Source at this juncture would be pretty awesome. To trash his Proco, trash the same old thing, board wipe with, just tagging overall is really good. I mean, and I could use exchange of information, except that I don't have an agenda yet. So my opponent does a very sneaky trick here, plays the Polop, and trashes my Jackson, and is going to fetch 1 agenda in archives. I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm absolutely perfectly fine with that, because that 1 agenda is the global food that I intend to swap with EOI sooner or later. So that's good. I still don't find the 1 of 2 copies of AstroScript left in my deck. So this is really starting to become a grind. I definitely did not anticipate this deck to become so grindy in the first place, but I guess that's, again, going back to the naked AstroScript, I really should have left it in my hand instead of risking it in the remote. That was a really horrible choice in hindsight. Breaking news. Okay, game on. I'm gonna install the breaking news in the Sansan server. Is he gonna contest it? He has a clone chip, he can retrieve plot. And he does retrieve plot, not what I wanted to see. I really wanted to score the breaking news and trigger EOI. So the next best thing I can do here is to double ice the remote, and then install a new remote. Perhaps throwing him off with mind games. We'll see if he's able to get into the remote. Almost certainly he will be, and that will be a huge loss for me, because that brings him up to 5 points. He'll go up to match point. I really hope he doesn't same old stim hack into my server. All I have is a lowly resistor protecting it. So he uses professional contacts twice and seems to not be interested in contesting the server. Very interesting. So he played the Clot without running the server, which is never something you should do. If you suspect that's an agenda, you have to contest it. Otherwise, why do you install Clot in the first place? But my opponent's reasoning was that he didn't draw the card he wanted to see, and he wanted Clot in circulation after the levy anyway. So it is justifiable to install the Clot at that juncture. So that was good for my opponent. What was bad for my opponent, however, is that I can score breaking news after click 1, giving me 2 clicks to play around with those 2 tags. I exchange the information, and I trash his professional contacts. Suddenly, my opponent is very poor. That was a huge game changer. That was huge. So this basically changes everything. He was forced to spend 1 whole turn playing Lucky Find and clearing both tags, because exchange sticks the tags on you if you're exchanging the breaking news that you just got. So now I'm up 3 points to 3. It's a pretty close game now. It really is anyone's game. In fact, I'm actually ahead. All I need to do is to clear the Clot with the cyber decks I just threw into, and I can begin scoring agendas. I'm going to try to score this global food here. I'm going to even advance it right in front of his face. Let's see if you have the stim hack in hand. I'm gambling that you don't. With very few credits to his name, surely he cannot contest this remote. It cost him a lot to get past the toll booth, and he doesn't have a barrier breaker available for my resistor. But he does have a Dirty Laundry, and that's gonna give him quite a few credits. I fire an Archangel. He hit basically the worst of the 5 cards in my hand. There are 2 agendas, but he decided to hit the Archangel. And it fires off, and I get to bounce his Cyber Cipher. it is very clear that the advanced item in the remote is an agenda. So I'm going to make sure that it's very, very hard for him to get into this remote. If he wants to get in, he'll be forced to play that side again and find some barrier breaker to get through, which he does. He plays the SMC and makes a run. So very clutch there that my opponent had both Dirty Laundry and the SMC. That allowed him to challenge my remote. He's going to go bankrupt running this server, but it's going to pay off. He's going to get another copy of Global Food Initiative. Not the worst deal for me, again, because I can swap it for a swap the Global Food over to my score area. The bad news is that my opponent would now be on match point with 5 agenda points. And here's a really cool trick. I let my opponent do the plot purging for me by accessing the Cyberdex Virus Suite. My opponent cannot afford to trash the Cyberdex. Because it's his last click, he has fewer credits than me. If he trashes the Cyberdex, he will trigger my ID. So he cannot actually trash it. He tried to do so and then remembered about my ID and said take it back. I do not want to trash this thing. Lovely. That was a free purge. Completely free of charge. And I get to keep the Cyberdex on the table, which reses for free with tempo credits. If he decides to install a clot later on, it's useless. I can purge his clot. So this is a really amazing part about this particular ID, that sync that any H cannot do. The defensiveness of your upgrades is boosted so much, especially the very flimsy upgrades like Cyberdex Virus Suite and Sensi Actors Union. You notice that the Sensi has been taking off the entire game. My opponent has no time just simply cannot afford to go trash Sensi Actors Union because there's just no time for him to do so. He has no credits, he cannot afford to take the tag and then clear it. That is too much of a tempo hit. So this is absolutely lovely right now. I slot something in the remote, so at this point my opponent knows that there's no way they're going to be able to contest it unless they actually draw into their stim hack. And anyway, I can fast advance agendas anytime now by simply running them over the Sansan. There's no way he can stop me because I have a live Cyberdex. So my opponent just does some basic actions to get money, get cards, and I finally find the Astro script I was looking for. So I trash the duplicate Mumble Temple that was a bait, and I go for the real score, the score that I've been looking for this entire game. Alright, so here's the deal. If I have a breaking news at this point, I win. Install, advance, breaking news, and then exchange it with the global food. That will put me up to 8 points to win. But my opponent, knowing that, is trying to win this turn. So it's a Hail Mary run on R&D, and it's on the last click. He's forced to take the tag from Data Raven. And at this point, it's really Hail Mary. I know that I have a lot of outs to win. If he hits a quantum predictive model, he cannot steal it. It becomes mine, and he has to pass the turn over to me. I can exchange it for the game-winning global food. So I'm looking for that to happen, but with 3 accesses, my opponent can easily win off the top of R&D by stealing a food or the final Astro script. So I can only hope for the best at this point. I'm going to shuffle in with Jackson Howard a couple more cards to lower agenda density. I initially decided not to because I want him to hit the QPMs, but on second thought, it's a bit too risky. There are still 2 more agendas that would win him the game in R&D. The remaining agendas in R&D are all 3 copies of QPM, a 15 minutes which does nothing, and a single Astro and a single food. 3 accesses of that many cards, and he actually finds it. So very unfortunate for me, but it just goes to show how powerful this deck is in so many ways. So that game could have easily gone either way. Instead of rambling on about the game, let's talk about the ID itself, controlling the message. Note that these are just my first impressions and they can easily change over time. I could be very wrong. But to me, it seems like this ID is very polarizing in the sense that if you have the correct solution to CTM in your deck, you're just going to ruffle stomp over the deck. Having a very high base link with rabbit holes or with sports hoppers, or if you're Sunny, you're just going to completely neutralize the core, because not only is their ID more or less blank, their ice is also blank. They are most likely running resistors, data ravens, and all sorts of tracer ice, archangels. They are all completely wasted. E-Strike, Employee Strike also ranks this deck really high. It's akin to playing Employee Strike against IG, except there's no counterplay in the form of Cerebrostatic. You could play Targeted Marketing, but it's really not that good. So um, even during that period, it's very easy for the runner to just trash all your key assets and just bring you back to square one, which is a big problem for this deck. CTM is otherwise seems like a very strong ID. If you don't pack these hard counters, you can think of them as silver bullets in a way. The runner can't do anything about it. Like in this game, the moment you saw Kate with no scrubbers, no way to trash my assets easily, no way to avoid the tag easily, no way to evade the trace easily, they just have to let my assets go. They just have to let asset spam happen. And that means that I have a very huge advantage right from the onset. I can easily sneak out naked agendas, which my opponent very smartly decided to keep me honest about. But most importantly, I'll get away with endless Sensi Actors unions and cyberdexes that cannot be trashed. It's really insanely good. And I think this is not good for the game, because now the game is like, well, if I want to build a runner deck and bring it to a tournament, surely I need to pack one of these cards, High Link or Employee Strike, or at least something to defend against all these tech flooding. Well, I think that might happen, and that's not good for the game. Or people can just start realizing that getting tagged against NBN is something that will happen. You just have to accept your fate. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of anti-tag cards out there. Paper tripping is one of the few, but all these cards are just very, very far below the power curve and unapplicable in most other matchups. So you just have to accept that getting All-Seeing Eye, losing all your resources, getting close accounts is going to be your fate. The only silver lining is that they can't really play Scorched Earth and maybe Traffic Accident, but not Scorched Earth because of the limited influence. You can't bring the kill package without losing key cards like Astroscript, like Global Food, like Sense City Grid. So at least you don't have to worry about getting your meat damage protection as well. Exchange of Information and Psychographics seem like the best routes to win for a CTM deck, and I think a lot of people will be trying that out. So that's my take on the new ID. What is your opinion? Leave in the comment section. I'd like to hear from you. And let me know how your experimenting goes on as well. This is definitely an ID worth experimenting for. Thanks for watching. Happy net running. Goodbye.